All right, geometry, our final skill for the week is going to have us working with triangles. Now, you know we spent a huge portion of the curriculum talking about triangles. They are basically the foundation for all other polygons. Now, because of that, we're going to be working with triangles that are basically inside of other triangles. When you look at this shape, some of you might see a quadrilateral that looks like a trapezoid connected to a triangle. But others might see a small triangle that is inside of a much larger triangle. And for this section, that's the way we want to visualize this. We want to look at this as one shape that is inside another shape. They are simply different sizes. If we are told that the segments are parallel, like they are in this section, that is what will allow us to set up a proportion to find the missing parts of this shape. Now, the good news is nearly every single question in this section is the same math in order to solve. You will come across some that require just a tiny bit of extra work, but for the most part, if you can solve this first example, you can hopefully solve almost all of them. So my goal on this first question is to find UV. UV is located right here, so I think it only makes sense for us to put an X. Now you need to figure out which things you'll put in your proportion. Now the good news is it's not terribly complicated. You're going to be using these 4 items that are in the picture in order to find our proportion. If they were to give you these pieces for any reason, then the problem would become a little bit more challenging. Don't expect to see them give you those lengths until you are at a much higher SMART score. So for this problem, I can go a couple of different ways when setting up my proportion. I can match up the 2 pieces that are inside the small triangle, and then match up the 2 pieces that are part of the larger triangle. Or I can simply go from left to right, matching up the 2 pieces on that side, and then matching up the 2 pieces on that side. I'm a big fan of just kind of not changing anything. I notice that that's kind of like a fraction right there, and that is kind of like a fraction right there, and I'll simply put my equal sign between them. So, when I set up my proportion, I'm going to choose to take x over 14 and set it equal to 24 over 28. But once you get your proportions set up, it's going to be just like all the other proportions you've looked at so far. Cross, multiply. So 28 times x, and then we set that equal to 14 times 24, which is 336. The good news is most of the answers are nice integers. When I divide on this, I'm going to get an answer of 12. So just to show you guys, we'll go ahead and plug in our answer of 12 just to verify that we in fact improve our score from 0. And you can see our score has improved. The next question, hopefully you'll notice, not a whole lot different. Same type of question. The figure has just been turned. Let's jump ahead and look at what one of the more challenging questions might ask. So that question, honestly, the only difference is it doesn't tell you that the segments are parallel. Instead, it visually shows you that they are parallel using the red triangles. But we're asked to solve for RV, and we would just set up a proportion like we did on the previous two examples. Now this time, it's a bit more interesting. This question has a little bit of a difference in its visual. We're still being asked to solve for UV, and therefore we'll go ahead and put an X in that location. But you'll notice up here, I'm not provided with the two pieces. I'm provided with this piece and then the entire length of the segment. That means I could use that entire length, but then I would need this entire length. And since I'm solving for X, that might be challenging. The good news is, if we think about this, I can just do a little bit of subtraction. If this here is 17 and that is 51, then doing some subtraction should tell me that 51 minus 17 means that this value here must be 34. That's the only way that the two pieces will add up to 51. So now what I'm going to do is basically ignore that number. And now I have a question that looks a lot like our first example. Piece, 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 and piece. And I can set up my proportion. So, lots of ways to do it. I think this time I'm going to go left to right. And because I went from left to right, I'll have to do the same thing, left to right. Now, when you cross multiply, you're going to end up with a little bit of a mess, but I'll speed up the process on this one. You should solve after cross multiplying and get a final answer of 18. So, I'll go ahead and plug in 18 so we can verify that our score increases, and we'll check that none of the other questions get too much more difficult. So 18 should be our answer. And we should see our SMART score go up from 55. All right, now believe it or not, even though our score has gone up, this next question isn't actually harder, but for some of you, I bet you would get the answer, think you had it correct, and submit it to find out that you made a mistake. Now, this problem is not more difficult than the very first example. In fact, the previous problem was actually a little bit more challenging. The only part of this question that can be difficult is the fact that if you don't pay attention to what you're solving for, you're likely to make a mistake. They do not want me to find Tx, which is right now the missing piece that we would have solved for like we did on all the other ones. They want me to find Ux. Now really, that's not a lot of extra work. I'm still going to place x in that position. I'm still going to set up a proportion. Now I think for this one, I'm going to go left to right again. And then I'll go left to right. You're going to cross multiply, just like we did on that question. And then you'll solve if necessary. My x value that I just solved for is 14. Now, here's where you want to be careful. On all the other problems, once we solve for x, we type that in as our answer. But on this question, because they want ux, I have to actually add these two numbers together. It's not really a lot of extra work, but it's just enough of a trick that there's a chance that you might keep getting questions like that wrong, even though you're doing all the math correct. So if I add 28 to 14, I should get a final answer of 42. So we'll go ahead and type in 42. Let's make sure our SMART score goes up, and then we'll know that we did that problem correctly. And you can see that our score improved. So guys, this section might require you to just take your time when you're reading, but overall, you just got to get that proportion set up correctly, and once you do, solve it just like we did in skill number 1. So that's the end of this week. Hopefully you guys will get through these skills pretty quickly. Remember, as always, if you have questions, don't hesitate to email me. I will see you guys next week.